So as we start to look at the last year in review, I thought I'd begin by talking a little bit about how we fight population-centric coin, and specifically how much we rely on our junior leadership. You know, in order to execute population-centric coin, it's a requirement to be out there living amongst the population, and it forces us to spread our forces very, very thin. And in many cases, we've got squads out there that are operating independently, living amongst the population. When we took over Helmand in March of 2011, we had over 220 positions spread out across the battle space. And in many cases, these positions were being manned and being commanded at the squad level. In some cases, they were independent. In other cases, they were partnered with Afghan Army or Afghan police, but we were relying on our sergeants and our corporals to run these positions. So it isn't cliche in the Marine Corps when we say that this is their fight. It really is their fight. We put tremendous responsibility on our junior leaders to execute that fight. We give them complete trust and confidence. They shoulder a great burden, and quite frankly, they rarely let us down. It's a little bit different, I think, than how some of the other services and how some of the other nations execute coin. It's not necessarily that our way is better than anybody else's techniques, but that's how we choose to fight coin. And over the last 10 years, we've had great success doing that. We've had great success relying on our junior leaders to accomplish that mission. So I should probably point out that the Marine Corps is front-loaded, if you will, with junior Marines. More than 60% of our Marines are first-term Marines, which means they're on their first enlistment. So these are young Marines between the ages of about 18 and 21, and frankly, we put tremendous responsibility on their shoulders. And they have, over the course of the last 10 years, certainly lived up to all our expectations, and that's been the case here over the course of the last year in Helmand Province. This clip, you'll see two examples of our junior leaders in action from 1st Battalion, 6th Marines up in Kajaki. These Marines are on the front lines. There's nothing between their outposts and the enemy. And they're out there every day accomplishing the mission. In the video, you'll see Lance Corporal Brown, squad leader. A Lance Corporal as a squad leader on the front line. And I had an opportunity to patrol with Brown, and he's just one of the finest combat leaders we've got in our junior ranks. The squad trusted him. They looked up to him. You know, eventually he got combat meritoriously promoted to a corporal, but for the most part he was out there as a Lance Corporal leading the squad every day in combat.
This AO that we're at right now is Paddock's. It moves from Abraham's Village to Paddock's, and that's where we're catching most of our contact. We're pushing 2-3 patrols a day, and even if it's your off day, you can expect to go out on QRF to bust your guys out of a bad situation. As a squad leader, you got to be able to take what you're getting from the radio and apply it out on the battlefield. Basically controlled chaos, controlling chaos.
And there's hundreds of examples of our junior Marines shouldering the responsibility here in Helmand. What has been most rewarding for me is having the opportunity to serve alongside. What's most impressive is watching the courage and the commitment. And I think it's important for us to understand that when we say that our junior Marines are shouldering the load of the coin fight, we really mean it. One of the biggest problems that we faced when we arrived was the historic facilitation from the south, the Pakistan border in Marjah, and the movement of fighters and weapons north into Garmsir and then up the Helmand River Valley. These are traditional smuggling routes that the Taliban had taken advantage of to enable them to move their fighters and their equipment with relative ease. And when we arrived in March, 1st Marine Division already had a plan to go down there and dismantle this facilitation node and to interdict the route from the south. So they planned an operation, they handed it off to us, and we executed. In fact, D-Day, if you will, was the day that we transferred authority here between 1st Marine Division and 2nd Marine Division. And I think it's important to note that, you know, we were able to sustain execution of that operation. We were able to execute a seamless transition with 1st Marine Division. We always talk about the fact that we stand on the shoulders of those that have gone before us, and in this case we were able to maintain the momentum that they had gained over the course of several months in the past year that they were here. So even as we rotated headquarters, we never stopped our operations. So the day we assumed command, we've got forces, 3rd LAR, down there along the Pakistan border. They conducted operations clearing the bazaar for 3 or 4 days down there. Then they pulled back from the border and established a patrol base, and we maintained continuous pressure and interdiction in the south for the next 8 months, with the LAR units rotating down there and continuing to disrupt that facilitation. As we're finishing that clearing op and establishing that permanent presence, sort of simultaneously, RCT-1 begins disruption operations in Garmsir, Nawa, and Marjah. And RCT-1 with 4 battalions executes about 45 days of disruption leading up to May, which is the historical start of the fighting season. And the complementary effects between the LAR operation and the sustained presence and the interdiction in the south and the disruption up there in Nawa, Garmsir, and Marjah, as we approached what would be the traditional beginning of the fighting season, really just smothered the enemy and dismantled any potential that they had to begin and execute what they would call the spring offensive. So what we saw last year in May and June was no real spring offensive, no beginning of the fighting season as they had witnessed in the spring of 2010. So in the last session we talked a little bit about the impact of shutting down facilitation from the south and the effective disruption that we executed and the debilitating effect that it had on the enemy as we went into the spring of 2011. The enemy is now short fighters, they're short of weapons, and they're disorganized. I'd like to talk a little bit about Marjah specifically, because there is always the question of how did the Marines turn Marjah? First and foremost, I'll tell you that there was a great deal, obviously, of sacrifice in Marjah. Heavy combat, hard-fought gains. But even after all that, there was still some doubt until the Marines gained the trust and confidence of the people. And there are lots of reasons that we were able to gain that trust and confidence. One of the biggest is treating the population with respect, respecting their culture. But another big reason was because the people realized that the Marines were there to protect them from the Taliban and that we weren't going to indiscriminately use force. One of the examples from 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Kyle Ellison, they had a firefight down in the blocks with the Taliban trying to entice the Marines to engage with local civilians in between. And in fact, the Marines held fast. They didn't engage. They didn't endanger the population. They protected the population, and then they pursued the Taliban later. And frankly, the word got out. And the people realized that the Marines weren't there to harm them. They were there to rid Marjah, the Taliban, and they were there to protect the population. Once they realized this, we gained their trust and confidence, and then they committed to a security. And they committed, quite frankly, in earnest to helping us provide their security, and in some cases showed a willingness to provide for their own security. And when General Petraeus, COM-ISAF, gave the Marines permission to train local police on our own, we were able to enfranchise a great deal of the population in Marjah. Now, we had experience with local security forces from Iraq. We understood the pitfalls associated with hiring locals to provide for their own security, so we made sure in this case that we got it right. And the local police were immediately tied to the uniformed police. The local police were vetted prior to their participation, required shurahs and agreements from the elders. They were integrated into the overall security plan, working side by side, not just with our forces, but also with the ANSF. And most importantly, once they were vetted and once they were participating, is the fact that they knew the enemy. And we found out through reporting that they were a huge threat to the enemy, because the enemy realized now that they had locals who knew them, who knew the area, who were actively participating against the insurgency. They became targets for the insurgency, but they stood their ground. And today, as Marjah is in the first phase of transition, these security forces, these same Afghan local police, are playing a key role. I don't put a lot of stock in statistics, but if you look at statistics in Marjah, you get a feel for the change from 2010 to 2011. From October to December of 2010, there were 54 of what we would classify as significant events within 3 kilometers of the Marjah district center. And then during that same 3-month period in 11, October to December of 2011, there were 5. And if you look at that same 3-month period within 5 kilometers of the district center, there were 233 events in 2010 compared to 8 events in 2011. So I think in this case, statistics are a little bit telling. Overall in Marjah, this year there were 176 significant events. Last year, that figure was up above 900. So today, almost exactly 2 years from the date our forces entered Marjah, Marjah is in the first phase of transition, and they entered that transition in December of 11. They held another round of elections earlier in 2011. The district government is up and functioning. There's 600 Afghan local police operating side by side with the Afghan National Civil Order Police, the Afghan Uniformed Police, the Afghan Army. Most people in the United States haven't heard anything about Marjah for months, and we think that the Afghan National Security Forces will be able to keep it that way. In the first 3 sessions, we talked mainly about what had occurred down south, so I thought maybe we would take a chance or an opportunity here to talk about what occurred in the northern portion of our AO, starting with Sangin. We knew coming in March of 2011 that the enemy was going to try and take Sangin back. We knew we had a tough fight. The Marines had a tough fight with 3-7 and 3-5 in 2010, and we expected the enemy to try and come back and take Sangin with a vengeance in the spring and summer of 2011. So because of the tough fighting that occurred, we had really gained some support from the district governor and the district chief of police. However, the people, the population, were really still indifferent. They had been under Taliban control for so long that they really weren't quite ready to commit to support either the Marines or the government, and they were suspect, quite frankly, of everybody, to include the Afghan government. Because we had forces committed to the south of Sangin in what we call the Upper Gereshk Valley, we really didn't have forces to commit any farther north. So we were really in a position where we were going to try and hold the gains that we had there in Sangin. We were going to try and make small gains here and there, but really the focus was hold in the spring and summer. And as we did that, we were able to increase capacity in the governance side. We were able to stand up an interim district community council and get some governance, elements of governance moving in the right direction. We were able to start some development project, and through this we were able to gain some support from the population, but most importantly we were able to prevent the enemy from making any gains back into Sangin. To expand security, we took our recon battalion and we consolidated those forces north in the upper Sangin Valley. And instead of doing typical reconnaissance mission and disruption up there in the upper Sangin Valley, we focused them on population-centric coin. We wanted to push the population, if you will, from neutral and negative to neutral to positive. And 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion came in there. They operated out of what we called the Patrol Base Alcatraz, and they did a great job of gaining the support of the people. We also, at this point, late in the summer, were able to insert some special operations forces, both Marines, Army, and Navy Special Operations Forces, to begin executing the Afghan local police program. We inserted 3 sites up there to start to recruit locals to begin to provide for their own security. We did this because the provincial government, the district government, the district chief of police all said that one of the necessary elements for security up in the upper Sangin Valley was local police, and really they were looking for a local solution. So we began these efforts establishing the local police, and quite frankly, here we are in February of 2012, and we're seeing the fruits of our investment up there now. We're close to 100 local police, and we're gaining a lot of traction and a lot of support from the local villages. So we're holding Sangin. Now we established the VSO sites, and then to the west in Musa Qala and Nowzad, we're trying to simultaneously expand security. The engineers from the logistics group improved about 80 kilometers of road between Nowzad, Musa Qala, and Gereshk. It allowed us to open up the economic corridor. This is what the people were looking for, and this allowed them to move goods between the big bazaars, the economic hub in Gereshk, and Musa Qala and Nowzad. And we saw the bazaars expand dramatically in both Musa Qala and Nowzad over the period of about 90 to 120 days. We saw prices drop, we saw people return, and all of a sudden the people saw a reason, if you will, to side with the government. They saw an opportunity. And then on the security side, in Nowzad, we held and we built and we expanded the responsibility of the ANSF. We continued to expand security north and northeast out of Musa Qala, and we maintained pressure on what some called the heart of the insurgency in Kajaki and Zamindavar. And our forces were developing greater capacity in both the Afghan National Army, the Afghan Uniformed Police, and as we began to thicken with the local police program, the National Security Force capabilities increased, and so did the government capacity up in Nowzad, Musa Qala, and Sangin. In the last session, we talked about Sangin, Musa Qala, Nowzad, and how we were pushing the enemy to the north, and then from Musa Qala, pinching back to the northeast, getting into what many people referred to as the heartland of the insurgency here in Helmand, up in Kajaki and in what we call Zamindavar. I thought it was necessary to push to Kajaki in order to maintain momentum and in order to defeat the enemy to the point that the ANSF could begin to manage the security situation on their own. I thought if we pushed the enemy far enough out and we established the police and the ANA and the civil order police in positions, that we would put them in a place where they would be able to manage the insurgency for the long haul. Obviously, the Kajaki Dam is important because water is important to the province. It's a farming community up and down the Helmand River, and there's two things that you need: water and dirt in order to farm. So there's a lot of talk about the capacity of the dam relative to electrical power generation and that type of thing, but really for me it was to allow the Afghans to control the water. It was to open up the lines of communication all the way north along Route 611 to the dam, and it was to maintain relentless pressure on the enemy where we knew he had what he considered safe havens and where we knew he felt he could bed down relatively freely. And that pressure on the enemy is ultimately why I wanted to move towards Kajaki. I'd really wanted to press to Kajaki, frankly, in the spring of 2011, but because we were committed in the upper Gereshk Valley, we didn't have the forces necessary to make the move north of Sangin. So as the summer fighting season sort of began to wane, if you will, we were in a position where we could reallocate the forces, move forces. In this case, we moved forces from Marjah. Took a little bit of time, but we repositioned slowly, starting in the beginning of August, to put ourselves in a position by late September so that we could make the move to Kajaki. We knew that we didn't want to push straight up 611 and into the IED belts. We didn't want to fight through IED belts, and knew the enemy would fight a delaying action, so we tried to put a package together that would allow us to use all the tools in the toolkit, if you will, as we advanced up into Kajaki. We wanted to keep the enemy off balance. We wanted to do some deception. We wanted to integrate special operations forces, information ops. Again, use everything that we had available in order to keep the enemy off balance. I'll tell you that in an 11-day period leading up to what we called D-Day in Kajaki, in an 11-day period we did 22 operations with the special operations forces. And one of the most effective was our integration of the Afghan commandos. Twice in Kajaki, we inserted the Afghan commandos for a 24 or 48-hour period, and then we landed on top of them with conventional forces. Those conventional forces were partnered with Afghan National Army forces. They did a battle handover of on the ground, and then the commandos retrograded, and the conventional forces again partnered with the Afghan National Army forces, continued the fight up there in Kajaki. And it worked perfectly for us on two separate occasions. I think it's probably the first time that it's been done with the battle handover here in Afghanistan. And really the results of all the coordination, the deception, the SOF integration, the use of commandos, the partnered forces, the result was that the enemy was overwhelmed. In fact, very quickly we gained access to the dam. We opened the road to Kajaki. We forced the enemy to withdraw to the north, and that's where he remained as the winter approached. This was a significant achievement, not just for the coalition forces, but for the Afghans, for the provincial government. I'm sure that we caught many by surprise based on the success, but really it was the Marines on the ground and the Afghan forces who performed magnificently. We couldn't have done it without the support of the MLG, without the support of the wing. They were all critical to the success and the ability of us to maintain momentum. And it was the integration of all the assets, all the resources, and the hard work of our SOF forces that allowed us to be as successful as we were. So we've now gained some momentum up there with the provincial government, with the district government. For the first time, this is the first time the people have seen, Afghan security forces. First time they've seen governance, if you will, in years. And they see it, and I think they want some more of it. And we expect Kajaki to continue to develop in the weeks and the months ahead. We would like to see the road paved. We think we can improve some irrigation project. There's work to be done in Kajaki, but we have had some great success initially as we moved our forces and secured the dam. All right, well, here we are up on top of Kajaki Dam. And we're up here to really summarize the last of the 6 series that we did as we talked about progress here in Helmand through 2011. The first thing that we mentioned was the interdiction piece and the closing off of the facilitation routes down south from Marjah. We sent the LAR battalion down there on 15 March. And they spent several days clearing the bazaar, and then they backed off and continued with interdiction with their LAVs in the southern approaches to Brig, and Garmsir. We complemented their efforts down in the desert with an air interdiction force and RCT-1, as I mentioned, with 4 battalions, maintained sustained disruption over the course of about 45 to 60 days. And these we might refer to them as spoiling attacks. We talked about disruption, but these attacks and this effort generally dismantled any insurgent effort last spring to kick off a spring offensive or roll into a summer fighting season. I think the second element of the campaign, I talked about deepening the hold, if you will, and opening up opportunities and freedom of movement for the citizens. Freedom of movement being a critical piece for the agrarian society. You have to have the capability to move your goods and to get your crops from the field to the market. And we spent a great deal of time improving roads. Some of the critical routes were 611 here behind me, opening up that route, certainly all the way to the Kajaki Dam. And there were a couple routes out in the west between Musakala and Nauzad that we repaired and we graded. We again gave the citizens an opportunity to get to the market and facilitated their freedom of movement. We couldn't have done this without the logistics group, the MLG resources, mostly for the repair of 611 here behind me and the repair of what we refer to as Route Red between Gereshk, Nauzad, Musakala. Most of the repair was done by the Engineer Support Battalion, and without the logistics group, MLG engineers, we couldn't have had the success that we had relative to freedom of movement and opening up these markets. Opening up the roads also allowed us to connect the citizens with their government. Critically important down in Marjah and Nawa was giving the people an opportunity to get to the provincial government. The same holds true for the Gereshk Road and Route 611, allowing the citizens to be connected with their provincial government there in Lash, and allowing the government, quite frankly, to outreach to the citizens out in the districts. In the previous, one of the previous sessions, I think I talked about earning the trust and confidence of the people. And really, this is just a matter of the Marines who operate out there every day, showing respect for the culture and earning that trust, not inflicting civilian casualties, even though the enemy might try to put us in a position where they could gain some civilian casualties. The Marines have to show some discipline. They've got to show professionalism, and we did that throughout the year in order to gain the trust and the confidence of the population here. We needed to convince the citizens that there is some benefit to them siding with their government. This is really critically important, especially for a people who has been murdered and intimidated and had lived through the last 35 years of violence. The people here in Helmand are very skeptical of choosing a side, whether it's choosing a side with the Taliban or choosing a side with the government. These people are survivors, and they tended to remain neutral. So we put a big effort into getting the people to see the benefit of their government. And if we could tip them from neutral to positive or from negative to neutral, then that would help us. That helped us along with the mission over the course of the last year. I didn't talk a great deal about partnered operations, but really partnered operations were very important to us. You know, that's how we developed the ANSF. We lived with them, we ate with them, and we operated with them every day. And the young Marines set the example for the ANSF. And again, that's how we got them out there operating amongst the population. That's how we gave them confidence, and primarily that's how we accelerated their development. There are things that we can't influence, you know, how the equipment comes down from Kabul, how the parts and how the logistics system is established above the corps level, but at the grassroots level, getting the ANSF out there among the population is critically important, and we did that with partnered operations. And we tried to teach the police to the degree that we can that their role is to serve and protect the population. And we did that again by partnering, by operating shoulder to shoulder with these forces throughout the course of the past year. I mentioned local police, primarily in Marjah, but now we're seeing local police in Nawa, Garmsir, Musa Qala, and Sangin. Local police are very, very important in this environment because it's an indicator that the people are no kidding willing to stand up in their local villages and take a side against the insurgency. And we've all heard about, you know, some of the distractors or detractors, if you will, from the local police, but in my view, local police are very, very important. Here we've tied them to the elders, we've tied them to the district chief of police, we've tied them to the district governors from the beginning. We do shuras as we stand up these local police forces, and the individuals that participate are vetted and they're vouched for by the elders, and they have been a very, very important aspect of the overall security. We use them to thicken the Afghan National Security Forces, and again, they provide value to the security forces. A couple last points that I'd like to mention. I want to mention integration of all resources, because we used, besides just our fighting forces and our partnership with the ANSF and our support to the provincial reconstruction team and the regional platform, we used information operations, we used PSYOPs, we used all kinds of non-kinetic resources. And integration of these resources was again very, very important to the success that we had out here on the battlefield. I'd be negligent if I didn't mention the integration of special operations forces. These forces, we sat down with them when we got here, and I think we established a relationship whereby we could gain the most complementary effects from conventional and special operations forces that was possible. And we had a superb relationship, and these are, everything from the night raids that everybody talks about to the village stability operations that we've got ongoing in the upper Sangin Valley. Integration of the Special Operations Force was very, very important to our overall effort here. Of course, the MLG and the 2nd Mall were also very, very important to our success. This isn't a, this isn't a GCE-centric effort over here. We couldn't have had the success that we've had, or made the progress, really. I won't talk about success, I'd rather mention progress. We couldn't have had the progress, couldn't have made the progress that we've made without the commitment of the MLG and the wing. And we couldn't, quite frankly, have expected the kind of support that we got. Absolutely superb across the force. And then finally, I'll mention our own Marines here in the GCE. That's really what it's all about. Any progress that was made, any success that was achieved over the past year is a result of the efforts of the Marines on the ground. That's the most important thing to me. And as a headquarters, our job is to make timely decisions, manage resources, and provide them what they need on the ground to be successful. So I'll close by just mentioning the commitment and the bravery of the Marines that have been serving here in Helmand. If you could imagine leaving the wire every day with a metal detector in your hand, searching for the IED, hoping you find it before you hit it, expecting a firefight on every patrol. We couldn't ask for better service from our young men and some women that we have out there on the battlefield. And really, for me, to have an opportunity to command, we always say it's a privilege to command. For me, quite frankly, it's been an honor just to be able to serve alongside these great young men and women.